So Jim, Breyer Capital now, you've set up shop on your own to pursue new philanthropic ideas. Are they the same kinds of big ideas that you looked for when you were swinging for the fences in venture capital, or are you taking a different approach?
It's actually a very similar approach, Bruce. I think with venture capital, one of the wonderful things about venture capital is consistently trying to innovate. And a fundamental part of venture capital is try over time to have more capital go into the good deals as risk continues to get reduced. Okay. Venture philanthropy, while far newer, is very similar in terms of the model I'm trying to build and pursue. Early on, there might be very significant educational initiatives in higher ed. It might be a course or two that is launched, perhaps a Chinese history course, for instance. Okay. If that is working, if the teaching and the interactive learning meet certain expectations, that pedagogy might then be transferred to a more significant set of courses. So the intersection of technology and education, to me, is very similar to what technology's impact has been on many fundamental industries.
Right, which is disruption and revolution and change. But to me, it seems like higher education is so ripe for that kind of change.
It is.
These schools, they just keep raising tuition and building buildings and expanding their plant, making their schools just beautiful campuses. And at the same, while technology is coming along that threatens even the idea of going to a campus and going to a place and studying at a Harvard or Stanford. So why hasn't that thinking reached the highest levels of these universities?
I think it is reaching the highest levels of the major universities in the United States as well as globally. I don't think technology will replace the physical world experience at many of the top universities in the United States. At the same time, much of the most innovative curriculum is being developed, if we talk about Harvard or Stanford, by young professors who are taking a flipped model, using social networks and communications to see and observe how learning is occurring. And in fact, one of the great outcomes of the technology impact on education is that teachers and professors at the research universities are focused more on learning and teaching than perhaps ever before. There's a swing back to what really matters is not just the research, but how are the students learning? What are the best ways to learn? What are the best ways to teach?
This is through technology. Like, can you give me an example of how this is playing out?
Absolutely. There's a China course, a History of China course that Harvard X has launched over the past 9 months. A couple of the professors who are focused on that course will say that they learned more about how to teach Chinese history to the student base of tens of thousands of students than they did over 20 years of lecturing about Chinese history. The idea that one can watch where the students are learning, where they might be getting tripped up. For instance, I know I get tripped up when I try to learn the Mandarin tones. It's very engaging to see how the very best teachers at any age, some are in their 20s, some are in their 80s, are observing how these courses are being taken and learning how to be better teachers and, in fact, improve the learning outcomes for many of the students.
Do you see the cost of higher education falling then in the next 5 to 10 years? Because everyone keeps talking about this can't go on any longer, yet it keeps ratcheting up.
I think at the expensive private elite universities, I think the fact of the matter is the costs continue to go up, partly because federal funding is under assault, and so many of the science programs, engineering programs, humanities programs are not receiving enough in terms of ongoing funding. Tuition pays for part of the experience for the full-time students. I don't see decreases, if you will, in tuition. Perhaps the rate of increase can slow, but I do think there will be a new set of coursewares, credentialed offerings that will be significantly lower priced, where if someone decides that they want to offer a data analytics certificate, students will be able to pursue data analytics, receive certification, and that may very well be exactly what an employer is looking for.
Now, I follow you on Spotify, and your playlists are incredibly diverse. It goes from Aretha Franklin to Mozart to contemporary classical music.
Yes, it does.
What do you like? Are you supporting the arts, the music arts at all? Or do you have are you patron to any composers or?
Well, I love music and I love art, and so for me, although I have some training as a computer scientist and mathematician, STEM, the phrase science, technology, engineering, math, does not do what we need justice. When it comes to education, I really believe in STEAM, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math. And within the arts, I'm active at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. I love modern and contemporary art. And when it comes to music, Spotify is one of our investments. I absolutely love the application, and everything from Bach to Mozart to Verdi to the White Stripes to the Ramones to finding a new group through Spotify, through my friends. It's easy to be passionate about music.
Right. And who are you collecting these days? What artists, emerging artists, do you have your eye on that people should be aware of, whether it's in Brazil or China or New York?
Well, it's a wonderful question. When I travel for business, which is China 3 or 4 times a year, and Brazil perhaps once a year, I always try to get off the beaten path and find young emerging artists. In the United States, I tend to love photorealism. Chuck Close and the era from the early 60s where the artists Richard Serra, Chuck Close and others spent time in New Haven, which is where I was born. Didn't know them when I was at that stage, but they speak to me in terms of how they've integrated photorealism, photography, and incredible gifts of painting. And so I'm always very humbled when I see new Chuck Close or new Richard Serra works.
The guy running the Yale School of Photography, he's championing a lot of young photographers that do that kind of street photography like Lee Friedlander.
Well, it's a very exciting time also because of the intersection of photography, painting, and many of the visual arts. And so we'll see some fascinating video and internet-oriented photography and art that will break through in many ways into more mainstream art over the next 5 to 10 years.
Even Instagram, you're starting to see some professional photographers make a living.
Instagram even allows me to create every once in a while an artistic photograph. Not often, but once in a while.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot, Jim.
My pleasure.